The reason it never dwindled in terms of popularity, it was popular once it came out. A lot of film critics, a lot of film directors would watch the film repeatedly and pick out little things here and there.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast, where we discuss the world of film from a fresh angle. And now your host, Robert Yanis Jr.
Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast. This is Rob. On this show, we democratize the film criticism conversation by bringing on fans and critics alike to dig into their personal connection to a current or classic release. On this episode, I'm joined by Brian Susbielles. Welcome to the Crooked Table Podcast.
Thank you, Robert.
So tell people a little bit about who you are and where they can find your work online.
Well, I'm Brian Susbielles. I'm based in Florida. I'm a writer for InSession Film. And you can find me at Brian /Cine or Cine Man. Maybe people can understand the name. But I come up every week. I specialize writing for Criterion channels and Criterion releases. Primarily like the older films, not like the current ones today. Well, obviously with the current situation, there are
what current ones? Yeah,
I'm talking about years ago, decades ago.
Yeah, I actually just recently, because I obviously have been aware about the Criterion collection forever, and I've been meaning to sort of venture into that part of my collection a little bit. So I actually recently picked up the Before trilogy box set. So for someone like me who's sort of a newbie to the Criterion world, what would be some of the Blu-rays that you would recommend that I check out first?
I probably, off the top of my head, 400 Blows, Francois Truffaut. The movie we're about to talk about, 8.5.
Yeah. We
also got a lot of Ingmar Bergman films from there. Of course, we lost Max von Sydow last week.
And they did, because I think they have a Criterion box set, if I'm not mistaken, of Ingmar Bergman stuff.
I don't know, not a box set. I mean, I know that they probably have like his early films from the 40s all together. You could probably find it in large groups if you go to like Criterion channel also, because Seventh Seal, Persona, Fanny and Alexander, it's just so jam-packed with the special features. It's, Scenes from Marriage.
I think also we should probably mention, since the whole coronavirus thing is happening, people that are looking for streaming entertainment, the Criterion channel is a pretty good place to turn.
Yeah, good advertising because it's a free trial for 14 days, 2 weeks. Not
a sponsor of the show, unfortunately, but yeah.
I'm not a sponsor of the show, but I'm a Criterion buff, and I've been seeing. I guess over the weekend, I've been really seeing a lot of films or rewatching, and they keep bringing in stuff, alternating, and it's just endless. Just endless stuff. Yes, it's old. Yes, it's old. Yes, it's black and white. Yes, it's in a foreign language. But if we all celebrate Parasite's Best Picture victory, we can all certainly watch more of these international films and get over that 1 inch.
I was just gonna quote Bong Joon-ho there too. Yeah. I mean, and it's good that it's good that you chose such a classic release, because I will readily admit that kind of a lot of the older films I'm not as well versed on as I should be, and I know that every once in a while, film Twitter kind of goes crazy on whether or not you're as much about film, blah blah blah. But I think the biggest thing is that you're trying to, us film people are trying to enrich themselves. We're seeking these things out and trying to fill in some gaps of our knowledge of cinema. I feel like it's disheartening even for someone who's not as well versed on classic films like myself to see. Whenever anybody posts anything film related, they're like, what's your favorite blah blah, and there's like literally nothing before 1990, or even like all like movies in the last 5 years, that kind of thing. And I feel like we're losing in a way, and I don't know if that's because of the what do you think is sort of behind that, the fact that we're losing our connection to kind of classic cinema? Do you think it's just that everybody's just so focused on streaming and a lot of these films aren't available, or what do you kind of credit that to?
I think, the streaming generation, as I like to call it, we're in this new era where everything is streaming, and most of our TVs in the last decade plus have kind of expanded, to movie like, features.
Mm-hmm.
So people want to watch HBO and Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime. Of course, I watch shows too, and we've seen, as exampled by Fox selling their studios to Disney. It's just the franchises have really taken over.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of big studio stuff. Obviously, there's a strong indie film. There's a strong indie genre, and that we always like to promote. But in terms of just theater success, that's been the Marvel / DC movies. It's been the live action remakes.
It's been everything Disney has been putting out, basically, and and then the increased, I guess, corporatization of everything, of media. And what do you think is going to happen now? Because the big news as of this recording, the last couple of days, I think it was yesterday, is what Universal is doing and putting their theatrical movies on streaming. So films like The Invisible Man, Emma, and The Hunt, and then Trolls World Tour, which was supposed to be a wide theatrical release in April, are now just going to be available for 48-hour rental for, I think, $19.99. How do you think that's going to change the game? Because I feel like could be a fulcrum point that sort of tips the scales more towards streaming in a way from the theatrical experience, which on the one hand, as a student of pop culture, I'm really curious how it's going to play out. And on the other hand, as a person who really loves going to the movies, I'm kind of worried that's going to threaten that experience somewhat.
Yeah, I suspect the studios are going to keep the big films for the movie theater when they reopen. So I don't expect to see No Time to Die get the rental release.
Right.
I don't think Disney is going to really release Mulan to streaming so quickly. See, Universal just punted Fast and Furious 9 back a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there'll be some films that will get the rental treatment, and I think it's kind of good. It keeps them churning out stuff, doesn't make everything just stop in terms of their planned, because a lot of productions are frozen, so they have to, whatever that they're in post production with. I would say if it's definitely worth seeing on streaming. Now I'm a guy that prefers to see it on the big screen. I'm just biased like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's good that they put Birds of Prey earlier for streaming, because it came out last month.
Yeah, so I wonder if we'll see either just more of a split where we'll have the major AMC and Regals that'll carry the big releases, and then people that want to see the smaller films on the big screen will just have to find their local boutique theater if their town is lucky enough to have one. Like here in Tampa, we have the Tampa Theater, or if even for the big movies, we'll start seeing that window shrink between theatrical release, kind of like what they're doing with Birds of Prey. Granted, this is obviously extenuating circumstances all across the board right now with all the theaters closing, but it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out and how that turns executives, studio executives' minds as far as, oh, well, that worked out. Why don't we just try that again with this, this 40 million. But this notion that you're seeing, like you were mentioning, that you're seeing people writing up these, they should just release Mulan on Disney Plus. I'm like, that's a $200 million movie. That's not happening. I mean,
there's no way of doing that.
It's a far cry from like Lady and the Tramp, which I think cost $40 million or something. It's like, come on.
Yeah, because the releases are going to be so jam-packed that they're probably going to have to want to give some breathing space to what they have coming out.
Yeah.
So especially with any other film that's planning to come out towards later in the year.
Yeah, it's a total shit show. I'm really curious to see what's going to happen now whenever theaters do open up again. If everything's just going to we're just going to get all those March, April, May releases in the fall, maybe that September kind of lull that won't even happen now because everything will be coming out, or if everything just gets pushed to 2021 kind of Fast and Furious style. But it's definitely, you're the first guest I've had on the show since this whole issue's happened. So I thought it would be fitting that we kind of just address that a little bit.
Yeah, and me being, like many others, watching the Oscar race, we know that they haven't officially said it, but I doubt Cannes going to go on, unfortunately. But let's say they goes back to normal in the summer. That would be Telluride, then Toronto. You got Venice, and Venice is a different story, but that's when the Oscar films start their releases. Get shown to critics to build up the buzz. So it's way jam packed for every studio. My concern for the indie films that they may get squeezed out, because A24 was about to release First Cow, with from Kelly, I can't pronounce it. Reichardt,
I think it's Reichardt.
Yeah. So they were about to release that, then A24 held it back. So for all the studios in terms of post-production films that they're about to release and in production, they're all just going on the fly and just trying to get everything scheduled right.
Yeah. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned. But yeah, so as you mentioned, we're going to be talking about 8.5, the Federico Fellini film. So let's listen to a little bit of the trailer right now.
Bravo Guido, che stai preparando? Qualcosa di bello?
Guido, dove corri, disgraziato?
Guido, vuoi salire o no?
Vieni qua, buffone.
Ah, ma allora è una parte che devo fare. Mi hai preso per una delle tue...
That was a little bit of the trailer, or a trailer that I was able to find. Obviously, they don't have the original 1960s whatever trailer that I readily available on YouTube, at least that I could find. But 8.5, directed by Federico Fellini, starring Marcello Mastroianni. Did I pronounce? I think I pronounced that right. Yeah, I'm half Italian. You'd think I'd be able to do these things a little better, but
yeah, Marcello Mastroianni.
Mastroianni. Okay, there you go. Really cool names, by the way. But also. So 8.5, released June 25th, 1963. Obviously, Italian language, black and white. As I was mentioning to you right before we recorded, not a movie I should have tried to watch for my first time, like late at night after a hard day, after an exhausting day of work, just because it is a very challenging film. So what is it specifically about this movie that made you want to talk about this on the podcast?
First and foremost, it would have been Federico Fellini's 100th birthday this year.
Okay, nice.
And so shout out to my to InSession Film with and JD and Brendan, where right before they're doing kind of a analysis on every Fellini film he's done, and 8.5 in particular, it's considered one of the greatest films ever made. It's certainly in my top 10 of favorite films. It's a movie about creating or lack thereof, or failure to create, because it's about a director having director's block. And I think for anyone who is a director, a writer, a musician, a painter, any type of creative activity, you can relate to the character Guido, played by Mastroianni, in some form. For me, I've had moments, in my life, and being a writer, trying to be a writer, where I just kind of stopped. So I almost have this like kind of subconscious, what would how would it go? What would Guido think? Because throughout the movie, Guido has these fantasies that he goes in and out of. while he's trying to direct a movie that he doesn't know what it's about.
Yeah, and I think that that sort of meta commentary of the film was apparent to me, like in the first few minutes, because right from the get-go, the movie feels like it's commenting on itself. So you get the sense that Guido is obviously just Federico Fellini, sort of kind of exploring his own life, his own creative process, and putting that on the screen, which feels like something that probably had never been done before at this point in cinema. Does that sound about right?
I think for Fellini, because 8.5 refers to the amount of movies he had made at the time. This was his 8th full film, and then he did a film where he was co-director with, and this came off, just kind of a quick backstory. This came off the success of La Dolce Vita in 1960, and then whatever movie he was going to make, he really didn't know himself what to write, what was going to be about. The working title was The Beautiful Confusion, and it was just kind of an accident that he came to realize, oh, let's make a movie about a director who can't direct, which he suffered.
Yeah, and I think that really, it's one of those conceits, it's one of those ideas, I think, that could either come across as brilliant or really pretentious. And to be honest with you, for my first time watching this, I think the first half I kind of kept teetering back and forth a little bit on that. What was your experience watching this movie for the first time? When did you first see it?
I saw it in college because I minored in film. Shout out Lynn University, and I learned about 4 movies a lot, and 8.5 was just one of those films always that one of the professors would have.
Right.
And I was able to get my hand on it, and I watched it. Like, first time I watched it, I was confused.
Mm-hmm. That's where I'm at right now. It's still so fresh. I feel like just watching it one time, you're not really getting anything. You're not really getting enough from it.
Yeah, because it is surreal. It is a lot of fantasy in it. A lot going in and out. You don't know what he's trying to say, but it took me a couple times to get through 8.5. Probably a lot of critical thinking and studying Fellini's films, and just because Fellini's just a character of his own with these, I don't know I guess what's the word? I guess would be Baroque would be one description of him. Because if you see films like, if you see La Strada, if you see Nights of Cabiria, La Dolce Vita, and then afterwards where you had Amarcord and the ship sails on, he's not a straightforward, straight thinking director. He's never been. He never was, I should say. And he always, he always kind of challenged the status quo a little bit. Especially, this was post-war Italy that he got through, and so he was a little more open. So Italian films, even in Catholic Italy, was more open, talking about, sex and affairs. And La Dolce Vita was actually the first film with the use of paparazzi, something that Hollywood stars really hate today. And you kind of see it again, 8.5. For Guido, he puts himself as Guido, the director, who has, he's married, but he has a mistress. He's got a muse that he follows. He thinks about his childhood, like when he was a kid, like he lost his quote unquote virginity, not in the sexual way, when seeing a dancing prostitute when he was a kid. Thinking about his mother. So it's very self-reflexive, and there's some stuff, especially here in other works, that you see Fellini as himself.
It lays the character's faults pretty bare. I mean, the movie doesn't really necessarily judge Guido for being it just kind of presents him as the way he is, and the focuses on the relationships of the women in his life, but in a way that is not particularly moralistic, and I think conveys his sort of his inner struggle and the fact that he's trying to make sense of his life, kind of the way we are watching the film.
Yeah, and the thing he lacks is control.
Right.
So one of the most famous sequences is a dream where he has all these women in a room.
I was going to bring that sequence up. That was crazy.
One's about to start one wants to be a rebel, and here he is, the harem, and he kind of whips them all back in line.
Right. It's also just I know some classifications have this movie as a comedy drama. Do you consider this a comedy drama? Because that to me felt like probably the most satirical sequence in the movie, just because you're like, wow, the ego on this guy that he's just like has everybody in their little place, and when they get too old, they age out of his little system there, and they go upstairs, and like you said, literally whipping them. Do you think this is a particularly funny film, other than, I guess, like I said, that sequence?
I mean, there are some. I think it is fitting because he's got his dramatic moments. Like, for example, with the estranged wife, who doesn't believe him. Why did you bring me here? When you have the mistress not far in another hotel.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if you saw it the first time, then you watch it again, knowing a little more context, you can find those humorous scenes, especially when he interacts with members of the crew, who try to badger him on so many questions about the set or the costumes, or getting actors to play certain parts, or the certain roles of certain actors.
Yeah, because it seems like nobody, including Guido, knows what the hell is going on, what film they're making, something vaguely to do with science fiction. There's a rocket ship at one point, sort of. And it's, I guess for me, watching it the first time, it was, you start off trying to, your literal mindedness coming to a film, since we're all used to, straightforward linear narratives, is, okay, well, this is the dream and this is real life. But even the real, air quotes, real life sequences in this film don't really make logical sense. They have that, and it reminded me of something like Eraserhead, which is, again, also sort of surrealist, where you're not living in a world that makes sense. You're basically, the entire thing is within Fellini's headspace. So it's not going to be the kind of grounded narrative experience that you're used to. And I think that was, for me, early on, especially the first half of the film, trying to make sense of that, and just realizing at a certain point, like, okay, we're off on another stratosphere here, so I'll just have to roll with that.
Yeah, like if you see it for the first time, don't get put off by the first 4 minutes.
Right.
Where he's in traffic, he's trapped, then he gets out, he flies, then he's in the air, then he goes back down to earth, and then he wakes up. I think it's just kind of like the first sequence of Guido's mood, going as he struggles to make his way to make a picture.
Yeah, that part I did really like, actually, a lot, because he's literally commenting on 8.5 just as he's commenting on Guido's film. So I like the sort of, as you said, self-reflectiveness of those references. That's kind of self-awareness, and it felt to me that this was almost kind of a therapeutic exercise in a way for Fellini. There's that film Honey Boy that came out last year that literally was a therapeutic exercise for Shia LaBeouf, and this sort of feels like something that he's just like, was in that same sort of director's block space, and just had no inspiration. It's just like, I'm going to make a film about how I have no inspiration, and help me get past that. And in that respect, I think it's really kind of admirable that he was able to pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, Fellini had that clout already, to make such a film and risk it. because I think a couple of the films, like La Strada, I think got best international film, and 8.5 would actually win best international film also. It's so Fellini, and he also had there's 4 writers, including himself, on it, and each of them had like a different job in terms of adding scenes and dialogue. And Fellini, because I know that sometimes he didn't go into too much with the Italian intelligista part with the other writers because he had such a bigger position in being a director. And he was married to a great actress, a comic actress, by the name of Giuseppe Messina? I think that's her name was, and she'd been in a few of his movies. But it was known that he also had discreet or indiscreet affairs. Mm-hmm. And so I guess you could probably say, as you said before, it's he's getting away a movie talking about himself, but he kind of throws in the caveats like why does he have a rocket ship there, or the dream sequences again, which I think the more you analyze it, the more telling I think it is, especially towards the climax of the film when he is being surrounded by the press who want to know what is the purpose of the film that he's that he wants to make.
Yeah, and we don't really the movie never really answers that, which I also found really really interesting. So we think, like, I know, again, as I was saying with the literal mindedness, is there a read of this film where all of this is in his head or something like that? Because I sort of was like half expecting that to be a twist kind of at the end, because it opens with him in bed and obviously, like recovering from, I guess it's supposed to be director's block or anxiety or whatever. I was almost half expecting the end of the movie to sort of flash back to that, where the whole thing was just kind of an elaborate fever dream of him like trying to seek redemption, because very much so throughout the movie, he's trying to figure out what's wrong with me. Why do I treat my wife this way? Blah, blah, blah. And he's like trying to sort out his own inner demons and that kind of thing. So I was kind of expecting it to go that way. And then later in the film, when he's hiding from the journalist, he crawls under a table and shoots himself in the head. So what is kind of your interpretation of, I guess, everything I just said, and then specifically the ending, because it gets even more surrealistic towards the end, where it just becomes kind of some kind of a circus, basically. And I think it's Carla who's kind of tells him what he was trying to say the whole time. What is your interpretation of the end of the movie, and like what is the final statement? If this whole thing is sort of a reflection on Fellini's process and his life and dealing with being a filmmaker and telling his telling stories and all that stuff, where does the movie ultimately end, and what is kind of the, I guess, takeaway, if there even is one, honestly?
I think you have the technical struggles and the personal, and I think going to that ending, because it is that suicide, it is kind of like a fantasy. It's another metaphor of escape, right? He wants to escape. Maybe that spaceship, he wants to get in and really fly out and fly away because he can't get out in any of this, and he can't find anything happy in what he's doing. Like he has a scene where he gets a meeting with a respected cardinal from the church, and it's kind of an unusual meeting because they're in, I think it's like it's not a sauna, but they're in this bath together. Yeah,
like a steam bath or something. Yeah.
For him, the response is, it's just, he doesn't do anything. He thought the cardinal could help him, and he can't even get an answer from, the Catholic Church. But then you also look at the ending where when he does find out what he really wants to say, and he does kind of directs, you would say, by having people dance in a circle, and he is on the megaphone getting people in line with actors that are playing people from his real life. Even as I talk to you now, I'm still trying to dissect more and think. Again, I just rewatched it, and the more we watch, the more I end up thinking about it. Which I think was why I still love the film.
Right.
Because there's just way too many. There's a ton of layers into it. Because it's such a surrealist thing that you don't know what's real or not. You just have to kind of read into, I think, Fellini's background to kind of pick it out one by one.
Yeah, it's really sort of an unsolvable puzzle in a way, and I think the character is fascinating in that you sort of empathize with him, but also he brings a lot of this on himself, so that you have that complication there, and just as you were, I think you mentioned earlier, his just need for control. He wants to be in control of things, but he doesn't want to make decisions. So he's just like, he has his mistress, he brings her there, and then he puts her in a hotel across the way, and, it kind of mostly ignores her the whole time. And he wants to, I think a couple times in the film, the women in his life sort of mention, oh, what do you think, I'm one of those actresses in your movies? Like, he wants to direct his real life, basically, and all the people in it, as evidenced by the end of the movie, where he is, as you said, on the megaphone and telling everybody what to do. And it's just the acceptance that he can't be in control of everything, and his just inability to deal with that. Yeah.
And I don't know, what did you think of, I think one of the other famous scenes is with the prostitute, dancing La Saragina. For those, also by the FY, for those who don't know, 8.5 was the basis of the musical 9 on the stage, and then which became itself a movie.
Right.
So if you see 8.5 and it looks like something very similar, well, yeah, it was adapted to become a musical, to a Tony Award-winning musical, then a movie.
That actually kind of makes me want to see 9 now, which I've never seen, just out of curiosity to see. And I've heard very mixed things on that film. I've heard it's overall kind of like, this is what Day-Lewis did. This is like one movie every 5 years, and he chose this. But yeah, I digress. Go ahead. Sorry to interrupt.
So, what do you think your interpretation with some of these dream sequences, like his flashback to dancing with the prostitute, and then how humiliated he becomes after that encounter?
As far as why it's in the film, or just to kind of its general relevance to...
Just kind of like the general relevance.
I think on some level, I think Guido knows he has an issue, or like an insurmountable problem or obstacle with the women in his life. And I think on some level, this film is his attempt to try and figure out where he got broken along the way. Like, and I think that's why his mistress is in the movie, and he has this ideal woman who is only ideal because he's never spoken to her. And then once he talks to her, she's like, you can't love. That's what's up. And then obviously it's not the answer he wants to hear. So I think that's kind of more his attempt to trace it back, to be like, okay, well, where did this start? We see his mother in flashbacks. We see pretty much any substantive woman in his life, and sort of shaping his view of that dynamic and relationships in general. And so I think that's really where, as you said, that's kind of where he symbolically lost his virginity, and I guess really noticed women for the first time. And so I think that's probably she's kind of the original, air quote, the original sin that kind of started this whole thing.
Yeah, because he's like a kid. I don't know how you're, maybe 8 or 9. He's not the
Something
only
like
one.
That.
Yeah, he isn't the only one who witnesses this kind of exotic dance. Kind of like the forbidden fruit,
right? Which
is why you see how seriously he gets treated and punished by other priests in his school. Where nobody, including his mother, wants to even look at him the same, and then he goes back to class wearing the dunce hat.
I feel like it's just like the women in his life, he sees the women in his life more as something to be controlled or something to possess, which is why literally in that fantasy sequence, he's just has like a harem of women, all the women that he's ever met or been attracted to, basically, including several that are involved in the production of his movie that he doesn't have any like, romantic relationship or anything with. And then all the men in the movie are just super either critical or just, putting like his men are the men in his life are sort of the source of pressure, and the women are a source of both relief, but also where he's the only place that he feels he's able to exert any form of control or any bearing as far as who he is and what his purpose in life is. But even that is sort of failing him at this point in his life. And
yeah, because like I said before, he gets bad. The critics come, they badger him,
right,
and the press keeps asking questions, that he has no answer to, that he wants, that he can't escape from. That's why he just seems kind of like, like when you first see the rest of the crew in total, he seems kind of just walking in a big circle around, just trying to run out of the way, get find
escape.
He wants his peace somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's kind of he's as you said, he's stuck. He's stuck between between the men in his life that want answers and the women in his life that are fed up with his bullshit. And him being at this, I guess the movie mentions a few times, I think, that he's 43, which I'm going to be 37 this year, so I'm like, oh man. I guess back then 43 was much further along in life, so he's obviously supposed to be way more burned out than I feel at this stage in life. But I think it's just kind of the classic middle-aged male dilemma, just brought to insane cinematic life. Go ahead, sorry.
It's a midlife crisis.
Yeah,
he's having a midlife crisis. We're not talking about like kids. We're just talking about just him being a director and it be with all these people around him.
Right. And of course, Fellini was 43 when this movie came out,
yep.
Naturally. So, I mean, it doesn't get much more obvious than that, what the situation is there. So, yeah, I think he, as you mentioned, he had the clout at this point in his career to make a film basically about his midlife crisis. And I think it's a fascinating work just based on what it's trying to say. I wish I had more time before we recorded this episode to listen to the commentary on the Criterion disc, or to like watch some documentaries, things like that. I probably will do that now after this, just being kind of inspired to dig a little deeper here. Yeah,
like I said, go to Criterion channel. I'm sure they have the Criterion, because some of the movies they have in like it's like if you had the DVD or Blu-ray.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure they would have plenty of special features, because I have the Blu-ray as well.
Yeah, I actually got the DVD from my local library before they all closed because of the coronavirus. So I'll have plenty of time now. Nobody will need it back for a while. But yeah, I'm definitely going to have to check out some of those features, because it's I did an episode on Mother, like I think last year, and that's also, again, very surrealist movie, very more just much more of just a metaphor in action than anything else, and just again very meta as far as a director dealing with his own struggles being a creator and all that other stuff. And so but the tricky thing about those is that unless you're super well versed in those films, it's kind of hard to talk about, except what's up with this, except just a lot of questions. What does this scene mean? What does this scene mean? And I think it's, I think we should obviously mention that Fellini's, the craft here is really strong. Like the way this movie is shot, the score by Nino Rota, the costume design, Oscar-winning costume design, the set design, like everything here is really technically pristine. The only thing that I really noticed, and again, this is mentioned in like the IMDb trivia and things like that, and I picked up on it in the first scene, was the way that the dialogue was out of sync. Like that was very obvious to me, that was the case. And it's like but that again was the time that was very customary for Italian movies.
Yeah, Italian films, it was the dialogue was spoken and dubbed post production.
Right.
They didn't have kind of the mix right there on set.
I actually think it works particularly well in this movie, though, because it is so surrealist and because it isn't trying to be a literal story. It's trying to sort of feel otherworldly in a way. And I think so in a way that actually lends to that aesthetic and makes the movie feel literally out of sync because the dialogue is sort of off, throughout the film.
And it's evident in the other movies, in his other movies, and the technical craft in his other. Well, this was his last black and white film, I believe. So after that he went to color. So just looking at that first half of his works, from 8.5 to Variety Light, which was his first film, which I believe he co-directed. That was the one that's where the half comes in. I think you can easily pick up on just how Fellini structures, in the themes, in terms of how he makes, his characters going in, like, because Fellini was, again, he was never kind of a straight shooter. For example, Nights of Cabiria is about a prostitute who's kind of not like down on her luck, but she falls in love too fast and gets her heart broken. And Lestrada, you have about this female clown performer and her butting heads with this domineering. I don't know how it would describe the character in Lestrada. Basically, her boss is basically kind of like a dictator, basically. Mm-hmm. Again, another great film. So,
what is it specifically do you think has that 8.5 has been the film of his that's like? Do you think this is his best film? First of all, and secondly, you do? Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Why do you think this has been the one that's really is held in the highest esteem? That it is considered one of the best movies of all time. Is it that meta element and the fact that it is basically a Fellini movie about Fellini, or is it the craft itself? What do you think is the reason there?
It is a meta thing, and the fact is that people, you would have to just people kept on rewatching. This is a film where you have to watch probably 10 to 20 times to get everything accurate, to learn, to pick up, the exact meaning of each shot, of each piece mentioned throughout the film, with every character, because everything overlaps itself. It's almost improvisational,
mm-hmm.
especially when you have everyone in a group. And so, I mean, let's see, rewatch. This is probably not the 10th time, but probably I've seen it. But you still, I would still have to rewatch and probably get more and more information. But it's just everything I pick up on it is good. It's just great, and it almost kind of inspires. And at the end, it just makes if you're a creator of something, you can find out what you want to say about your life or the lives of others.
And, like you said, I think it also getting everything in the movie, I think also depends largely on not only just how many times you've seen the film, but how much you know about Fellini's personal life and his own struggles and things of that nature, because it's a lot of it is on the screen, but it's you wouldn't understand the relevance unless you have that context to it. For someone like me watching this for the first time and not really having that context, it's like I enjoyed the film and I appreciated the film, but it's also more like I need to figure out the film now. It's a puzzle to be solved, or at least to attempt to be solved. And I think, that as you said, lends itself to people wanting to go revisit it over and over and over again. That now it's been decades on and people are still talking about this movie. And here we are on the podcast talking about it. So there's something to be said for films like that are challenging. And honestly, we don't really get enough of them anymore these days. Even like in the indie sphere, films are so focused, like audiences just expect to have they want those answers handed to them on a platter. And a movie like Mother, which I already mentioned, which I didn't necessarily love, I appreciate what it's trying to do, and that it is trying to push audiences to try and figure it out instead of being like, shrugging it off and going to get dinner or drinks after, and I think that's definitely something to be commended. And for people listening to this that I guess haven't seen 8.5, we did technically talk spoilers, but not really, because I don't know if I could even spoil this movie. I even haven't seen it. But I think that's a testament to just how rich it is.
Yeah. Question: you seen any other of Fellini's movies, or is this like literally
this is my entry point?
Oh wow!
I know. So you can imagine me being like, "Wait, what? What did Brian get me into?" Like this. I wasn't bored, but I was just more like, I don't understand what's happening right now. I'm sure it'll all make sense, kind of, sort of, maybe, after some reflection of my own. But yeah, so no, this is, and again, like I said, I have a tremendous blind spot when it comes to several like classic films, Fellini's work being among them. And so, I'm glad that you brought this to the table, literally, because it gives me an opportunity to finally go back and watch it. It's just keeping up to date with more, current releases and new things and what's happening. We were just talking about all the crazy stuff happening with coronavirus and how the industry is being affected. It's hard to take time to go back and watch these classic movies. So that's one of the things I've mentioned this on the show several times. That's one of the things I love about doing this podcast, is that someone like yourself will come on like, let's talk about 8.5. And I'll be like, oh boy, okay, Fellini, here we go. Finally got to make that a priority now. Set everything else aside because it's for the podcast. So yeah, Fellini virgin here, just entering the sphere.
Yeah, I think what I'm missing maybe toward the back end of his catalog, I haven't seen the last movie he ever did. Mm-hmm. The Voice of the Moon, because he died in 93. His last film was 90. And The Ship Sails On may have been like probably the oldest you'll find in the Criterion Collection. I think I got my hand on Intervista, which basically is probably as more self-reflexive you can get, but from the point of him towards the latter stage of his life.
Mm-hmm. So what, I guess now that we've established that, what would you recommend? I guess La Dolce Vita or La Strada, one of those next?
Yeah, La Strada, La Dolce Vita, Night to Cabiria. I would say any of those three would give you kind of a good starting point to work with.
Okay.
If you go into his other films, because film like Armor Cord, which was the last of his best international films, it's again a lot of layers to it, a lot of different stories connected to it. I guess you could see I Vitellini, which is one of his early films, but I would say for just straightforward storytelling, I would say La Strada, Night to Cabiria. Because the thing about actually with La Dolce Vita, it's you follow one person in kind of these multiple days, mm-hmm. one by one. Like there really isn't a plot. It's just you follow this person. I think maybe for just straight up storytelling, you look at Night to Cabiria or La Strada. Strada's like I would say a close second as my favorite.
There you go. That'll be the next Fellini film I look into then for sure. I guess before we sort of wind down, Brian, is there anything about 8.5 that we haven't mentioned that you want to make sure that we get out there? Obviously, we're doing sort of a more surface level dive than we could probably go on, do like a whole seminar on this film if we really wanted to. But any of the big points that you wanted to make sure that we hit?
I feel like even if we did this whole thing again and we said it completely different, we would still never. We would still never get deeper into it.
That's true. That's true.
Because it's just, it's just one where where you just have to kind of pick apart bit by bit by bit, and there really isn't anything deeper than what we've talked about.
Mm-hmm. It's more of in a way, I would say it's almost kind of like a tone poem too, where it's just a mood, or a mood piece, where it's just, this is where my head was at creatively. So I made a movie about where my head was at, about a director whose head is in the same place. And good luck with that, everyone. Figure it out. Let me know what you come up with, because my therapist is having a hard time. It's one of the, yeah. So, no, but I'm glad we got a chance to talk about this. And, I definitely need to fill in the rest of my Fellini, at least the major blind spots, at least the Lestradas, the La Dolce Vitas, Armacords, and things like that. So, so if there's, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I'm saying in terms of international standing, 8.5. It's been consistent with the British Film Institute's Sight and Sound poll in terms of top 10 films among critics and directors. I mentioned it won the best international film, and you could say a lot of movies that kind of followed 8.5 of making movies about making a movie about movie making, and kind of the back and kind of what happens behind the scenes. So Day for Night from Francis Truffaut. You can even go with All That Jazz, Bob Fosse.
Yeah,
heck, I'll give you
All That Jazz, which feels like a film very much inspired by this.
Even I would say maybe this is kind of a throwaway, but Synecdoche, New York, was that the Charlie Kaufman movie?
Oh yeah. Synecdoche, I think. Yeah.
I think because it's about a person who makes a play into like a literal city.
Yeah. I think there's a long tradition of movies made by filmmakers about filmmakers or some kind of creator, and I think, that's like a whole genre unto itself at this point, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So, Brian Susbielles, if there's nothing else, can you tell people where they can find you on social media?
You can find me at Brian _ is it underslash?
Underscore, I guess, right? Isn't it underscore? Yeah.
Okay, maybe I missed it the first time. I keep confusing it. It's at Brian _Cine, CINE. And you can also find me and my fellow writers in my work on InSession Film.
Awesome. Brian, thank you so much for coming on to talk about 8.5. I would love to have you back sometime. Think about what you want to talk about. Maybe something a little less challenging. Don't overwhelm me, but
I will make a note on that. Less challenging for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brian.
No problem.